Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Thursday, almost the weekend. It is not going to be a relaxing one for me. Hopefully, Saturday, I'm going to have an update on the Adam Montgomery trial's testimony for the week. So I expect to have that out Saturday or Sunday. Also, I'm going to be going through these depositions in the Petito versus Laundrie civil lawsuit. Those were just released, very revealing. I thought I could get them done in one episode, and then I downloaded the PDF and saw it's a lot. And I don't want to miss a word because it gives a lot of insight. And it also talks about things we haven't heard, which is their side, because as you know, they didn't say a word when Gabby was missing, unless it was through their attorney, who, by the way, is named in this civil lawsuit. We're going to jump into all that real quick. You know what to do. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, like the video, share it with your friends. If you want notifications, hit the bell. You guys have shown out subscribing. I appreciate it so much. Music fact of the day: the song Crazy Train is often misinterpreted as meaning crazy as in going mad or insane. But the song references the Cold War, which consumed the world. Fruit Loop and I actually covered this case as it was happening, and that was back when she was co-hosting the show with me. She has since gone on to open up a domestic violence safe haven with our friend Brianne, an amazing person. They are doing just beautiful work up there, providing a safe haven for women and children who are victims of domestic violence. They also house men off site. It's all free. They provide counseling. And I really think when this case came along, that was a big shot in the arm for Fruit Loop to go ahead and do what she felt called to do. In fact, they're going to be on the show at some point next month. We're going to go through things that people can watch for, little subtle signs of domestic violence that may not be obvious. And also, if you are experiencing domestic violence, there is help. The domestic violence hotline is 1-800-799-7233. They also have a website, thehotline.org. All calls are toll-free and confidential. The hotline is 24/7, and it's available in more than 170 languages. There is help. Please get out with your life. These things never end pretty for the victims, for the children that have to watch this who are also victims, and break the cycle and live. We're going to run through a timeline of this case. I have a whole playlist on this case. I'll link that in the description if it's not something you're familiar with. But in August of 2021, 22-year-old Gabby Petito was killed by her fiance, Brian Laundrie. They were traveling together on a van life journey across the United States. She started a YouTube channel. There's still one video on there titled Van Life: Beginning Our Van Life Journey. In June of 2021, Brian and Gabby leave for their trip. They started in New York. She wanted to go see her brother graduate, and from there started their trip out west. Gabby maintained regular contact with her family until the end of August, when those communications stopped completely. Gabby's four parents, I had the pleasure of meeting them at CrimeCon. My parents met them, and my youngest, 12-year-old Sarah Rose, met them. They are the nicest people. The pain in their eyes, very evident. That'll never go away, but they've made a bigger mission out of this. They now have a charity, and they regularly post updates on missing person cases, domestic violence issues. And so they definitely have made something out of such a horrible tragedy, even if it prevents one person from suffering that same fate as Gabby. It's a beautiful way to honor their daughter throughout all their pain. August 12th of 2021, Brian and Gabby are pulled over in Moab, Utah. Witnesses saw Brian slap Gabby before they left in the van, before they were pulled over. Officers suggested they separate for the night. It's really hard to watch this video. It was handled wrong from the get-go. They did not see Gabby as a victim, did not notice the fact when she pointed out she had injuries on her face that, in fact, she was the victim of domestic violence. Officer Daniel Robbins wrote in his report, "I do not believe the situation escalated to the level of a domestic assault as much as that of a mental health crisis. She was just seen as having a mental health breakdown while Brian charmed these officers, made himself out to be the victim." The abuser was put up in a hotel. On August 17th, Brian flies back to Tampa, Florida to empty out the storage unit that he and Gabby had rented to put their things in prior to the trip. Also, according to his mother, he was returning to get some things because they were planning to extend the road trip. On August 23rd, Brian flies back to Salt Lake City. That's where Gabby stayed while Brian was in Florida. The day after Brian flies back to Salt Lake City, Gabby checks out of that hotel she stayed in and has a FaceTime with her mother. She tells her they're leaving Utah and they are going to the Teton Range in Wyoming. On August 25th, Gabby and her mom texted several times. Her mother thinks Gabby and Brian were in the Tetons at this point. August 27th is a big day in this case. A lot happened. First off, a couple who was on vacation in Jackson, Wyoming said that they saw Brian and Gabby involved in a big commotion while leaving a restaurant called the Merry Piglets. Gabby was said to be in tears. Brian was visibly angry. He was going in and out of the restaurant a few times. Also was becoming angry with restaurant staff. Gabby was crying. She was apologizing for Brian's behavior. They were seen at Whole Foods. This is actually, if you're watching on YouTube, this is the last known footage of Gabby alive. One thing that stands out to me in this video is they pull in, they sit in the van for about a minute. When Brian gets out, he slams that door clearly in anger. And then they're seen walking around in Whole Foods. The same day, there was a text from Gabby's phone sent to her mother saying, "Can you help Stan? I just keep getting his voicemails and missed calls." Those messages worried her mother. Stan was Gabby's grandfather's first name, but she never called him by that name. People have theorized Stan is also an acronym for Send the Authorities Now. Nobody could have known, especially with that first name of her grandfather being Stan. On August 30th, there is a text from Gabby's phone to her mom that said, "No service in Yosemite." It is believed Gabby did not send those texts. On August 29th, a couple gave Brian a ride in Wyoming. This woman made a TikTok video about it after speaking to police. Brian said he was camping alone just outside Grand Teton National Park near the Snake River while his girlfriend worked on social media stuff. According to the woman that he rode with, when Brian found out they were going to Jackson Hole instead of Jackson, he got agitated and asked them to stop the car. He got out near the Jackson Dam, according to the woman. Another woman who lived in Wyoming seasonally said she picked Brian up around 6:15, not far from Jackson Lake Dam. He told her he and his fiance had a travel blog. She was back at the van working on that. He had been hiking on the Snake River embankment for a few days. This person gave him a lift to the Spring Creek dispersed camping area. She didn't go inside the gate. She offered to take him past the gate, and he refused. He offered her gas money for the ride, but she said she didn't take it. This is where Gabby's body was later found. She spoke with the FBI about her encounter. On August 30th, the next day, Gabby's mother received a text message from Gabby's phone that only said no service in Yosemite. Of course, it's believed Gabby did not send those text messages. On September 1st, Brian returns back to Northport, Florida. This time, he was in Gabby's van. Gabby owned that van. His license plate had been picked up on a reader after taking an exit into Northport, Florida at 10:26 a.m. from the interstate. On September 2nd, the Laundries, his parents, they retain attorney Steve Bertilino. They pay a retainer fee to represent Brian. On September 6th, the Laundries, including Brian, go camping a little over an hour away from their home. Roberta checked into the Fort DeSoto campground for a stay from September 6th through the 8th. They actually left on the 7th. On September 11th, Gabby's family reports her missing. A spokesman for Northport police go to the Laundrie's residence and asked to speak to Brian and his parents. A police spokesperson said that they were essentially handed the information for the Laundrie's attorney and said that was the extent of their conversation with them. On September 15th, attorneys say that Brian is not cooperating and they name him as a person of interest in Gabby's disappearance. September 16th, the Petito family attorney reads a letter directed to Brian's family. It said, "Please, if you or your family has any decency left, please tell us where Gabby is located. Tell us if we are even looking in the right place. All we want is for Gabby to come home. Please help us make that happen." Now, at this news briefing, their attorney, Stafford, says the Petitos had tried to get in contact with Brian's parents earlier in the month to get information about Gabby, but the Laundries did not respond to them. On September 17th, the Laundries asked the police to come to their house because they had not seen or heard from Brian since 3 days ago on the 14th. Now, later on, we find out it was actually the 13th. Steve Bertilino, the Laundrie family attorney, said the whereabouts of Brian Laundrie are currently unknown. The FBI is currently at the Laundrie residence removing property to assist in locating Brian. As of now, the FBI is now looking for both Gabby and Brian. On September 18th, they start searching for Brian at a place called the Carlton Reserve. The same day, the FBI announced they're focusing on the Grand Teton National Park to search for Gabby. That's where Gabby was believed to be last, according to those text messages with her family. On September 19th, Gabby's body was found in Teton County, right by a stream. I've got photos here on YouTube of the location. A YouTuber actually got footage of that van parked right near where her body was found. If you guys remember, you could see his hat on the dash. They were documenting their travels and just happened to pass that van not knowing. On September 20th, a search warrant was executed at the Laundrie home. And the next day, on September 21st, the remains are confirmed to be Gabby's. They announced she was a victim of homicide. The FBI takes over the search for Brian. On September 23rd, an arrest warrant was issued for Brian. They charged him with unauthorized use of a debit card. He used that to make withdrawals for more than $1,000 after Gabby went missing. On September 26th, there was a public memorial held for Gabby in Long Island, New York. It was also streamed online. And man, that was hard to watch. This blended family really banded together in their grief after the search was over, and they haven't stopped since. They are on a mission. On October 12th, the coroner announced that Gabby was strangled to death and she had been dead about 3 to 4 weeks before being discovered. I believe there was also blunt force trauma included in that autopsy report. On October 20th, Brian's remains are found there at the Carlton Reserve. They also found a notebook and a backpack. The remains were found in an area that had previously been underwater. His remains had been, it seems, chewed on by animals. His remains were positively identified that next day. They announced in November that he took his own life. He had a notebook which contained a confession, which was all BS, basically saying that Gabby was hurt and in misery. Nobody bought that. What a coward to lie. In his final moments, when he is writing out that, yes, he did kill her and not tell the real reason. You know, it's almost like he wanted to go out looking like a hero. It was sickening to read. On March 11th of 2020, the Petitos filed a lawsuit against Brian's parents, saying that on August 28th, Brian admitted to them that he killed Gabby, and they did not tell them while the search was ongoing for Gabby. The Petitos sued the Moab Police Department in November of 2022 for $50 million, alleging that their negligent failure in their investigation into that traffic stop and her death were caused by their wrongful acts or neglect. Gabby actually self-documented injuries that same day. And while she didn't show that photo to police, she did point out the injury to one of the officers to her left eye. That was not investigated further. In January of 2022, the Moab police released an investigation report into that stop between Brian and Gabby, admitting unintentional mistakes were made that day. On June 24th of 2022, the contents of Brian's notebook were released to the public, by the Laundrie family attorney, Steve Bertilino. On November 22nd of 2022, the Petito family was awarded $3 million in a wrongful death suit against the Laundries. Now, the deposition we're about to dive into is a separate lawsuit filed by the Petitos against the Laundries and their attorney, Steve Bertilino, for intentional infliction of emotional distress by claiming the Laundries knew that Brian killed Gabby but did nothing except release statements through their attorney where he said the Laundries were hoping that Gabby would be found. There was also a burn after reading letter that was found in Brian's backpack. It was a letter that his mother, Roberta, had written to him. He denies that letter was written after Gabby's murder. She said it was written before they left on their trip. Here is what the letter said. I just want you to remember, I will always love you, and I know you will always love me. You are my boy. Nothing can make me stop loving you. Nothing will or could ever divide us, no matter what we do or where we go or what we say. We will always love each other. If you're in jail, I will bake a cake with a file in it. If you need to dispose of a body, I will show up with a shovel and garbage bags. If you fly to the moon, I will be watching the skies for your re-entry. If you say you hate my guts, I'll get new guts. Remember that love is a verb, not a noun. It's not a thing. It's not words. It is actions. Watch people's actions to know if they love you, not their words. Therefore, I am certain that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor the ruling spirits, nor things present, nor things to come, nor power from above, nor powers from below. Nothing in the entire create world can separate our love. Neither hostile powers, nor messengers of heaven, nor monarchs of earth. Nothing has the power to separate us. That is actually a Bible verse, Romans 8:38. It says nothing can separate us, not hatred, not hunger, not homelessness, not threats, not even sin, not the thinkable or unthinkable can get between us. Not time, not miles and miles and miles. On the envelope, it said Brian Christopher Laundrie, burn after reading. Doesn't seem like a letter you would give your kid before they go on a road trip. It seems like maybe you would give your kid if they say I'm leaving after they've murdered somebody, but that's just my 2 cents. On January 22nd of 2022, Moab police released an investigative report into that stop, admitting unintentional mistakes were made that day. On June 24th of 2022, the contents of Brian's notebook were released to the public by Steve Bertilino, the Laundrie family attorney. November of 2022, the Petitos were awarded $3 million in a wrongful death suit against the Laundries. The trial for this civil action is set for May of this year in Sarasota County, Florida. So we'll go through Brian's father, Christopher's deposition when we finish Roberta's, and we will get at the very end to some things he did say in his deposition because it directly ties in where we're going to leave off today. Let's go through Roberta's deposition. When Brian returned home, they went to get him a new phone. He didn't say why he needed one. She doesn't know what happened to his old phone and doesn't think that he owned a tablet. She said prior to Gabby, she wasn't aware of Brian having any other girlfriends. He had a lot of friends he brought over, but none he introduced as his girlfriend. Never had problems in school. He also didn't have any anger or temper issues. When asked to describe him about 5 years before the murder, she said he was a sweet boy, considerate, loving, loved his nephews, his sister, and us. He had a lot of friends, a hard worker. She said, I could go on and on. He was wonderful. She never heard anybody suggest Brian was physically abusive in any way. Roberta first met Gabby sometime in the summer or fall of 2019, although she says it could have been 2020. It was around a year before her and her husband, Chris, moved to Florida that they met her. Brian brought her over one day and introduced her as Gabrielle. A week later, they all went to dinner and they slowly got to know Gabby. Brian never officially said Gabby was his girlfriend, but they just assumed. But Brian and Gabby moved to Florida just before COVID hit. They were living in Florida at an investment condo that Brian's parents had bought. His parents were not living in Florida at the time, but they did come to visit Brian and Gabby, as well as their daughter and her family, who also lived in Florida. She said they took a beach vacation. Brian and Gabby lived in that condo for about a year. Before the parents moved to Florida, they had only seen Gabby a handful of times. She said Gabby was very sweet, cheerful, friendly, warm, affectionate, kind, thoughtful, and a nice girl. Roberta said that her and Gabby were very friendly at the time. They would laugh and joke. And she said, I think we really liked each other. She said Brian and Gabby's relationship was very sweet. She said they were playful, they enjoyed each other, and she thought it was a nice, good relationship. Roberta said over time, her and Gabby got closer and they really cared for each other. She said she also thinks Gabby cared for her, and she said that she loved Gabby. She wasn't jealous of Brian's relationship with her. They talk about a pie that was thrown away. Roberta said she didn't remember that until it was mentioned the day before. The day before, by the way, was when her husband gave his deposition, and she said she did not throw this pie away. Roberta said her feelings were hurt over comments made about this pie. She said she did apologize to Gabby because she said her feelings were hurt and she was being sulky. She thought it was all forgotten and they were fine after that, but she said she just forgot about it until it was brought up. She thought nothing of it, and she thought Gabby thought nothing of it either. Roberta goes on to explain that her mother was visiting. Roberta had made dinner and this pie. She said she was exhausted from all the people in the house, and when she put the pie on the table, there was a comment made. She said there was a little ruckus at the table, and nobody made a nice comment. She said it was a lack of a nice comment. Nobody said, oh, nice pie. She said she regrets it. She got annoyed at everyone and a bit at Gabby. She said she was embarrassed and she wasn't very nice to Gabby at that point. She said she apologized. Gabby was nice about it, and they were fine after that. When asked what annoyed her, she said Gabby said nothing specific. She said we lived together. And she said, I'm sure that I annoyed Gabby as well. Normal, everyday things, but overall, they had a wonderful relationship and she felt like Gabby loved her. And that was mutual. Brian and Gabby lived there for about a year. And Brian's parents let them live there for free. That was supposed to be a rental property, but the condo association said after they bought it, they couldn't rent that apartment out for the first year. Roberta and Brian's dad said just instead of it being empty, they would let Brian and Gabby live there. After a year, Brian told his parents, I guess you guys want to rent it out now. Roberta told him it was fine for them to stay, but Brian said they didn't want to stay if they wanted to rent it out. Brian wanted to live with his parents and thought it would be nice for Gabby to come move in with them too, so they ended up selling the condo. Brian and Gabby moved in with Roberta and Chris in January of 2021 and stayed there until May. She said she never saw any disagreements or anything concerning about the relationship. Brian and Gabby had actually went on a trip prior to January 21, and that's when he asked Gabby to marry him. Roberta thought it was sweet. She was very happy for the couple. She wasn't worried they were engaged so young because they were well suited for each other. Also, Roberta said she was married at a young age. Brian and Gabby got along well. They both like art and drawing. And overall, they just seemed like a really good pair. When they all lived together, Brian and Gabby would go on hikes. They would go grocery shopping. They would go eat out. They would go for walks at night. Prior to Brian and Gabby, Roberta said her relationship with Brian was wonderful. They were very close and just had a solid relationship. Roberta said that her and Brian would go for hikes together. They would go shopping. They would go on vacations and watch TV. She said their relationship didn't change after Brian and Gabby started dating. When Brian's parents lived in New York and he and Gabby were living in Florida, they'd talk on the phone once in a while, and she said it was random. She said they may talk 2 days in a row and then not talk for 2 weeks. He never mentioned any issues he had with Gabby. And there was nothing when they all lived together after his parents moved to Florida that she saw as concerning. In 2021, just a week before Brian and Gabby left for their van trip, they found out that Brian and Gabby had moved things into storage, one of those storage units you pay, after his dad, Chris, found a receipt. Also, they were fixing up their van. She said that her and her husband put 2 and 2 together and realized Brian and Gabby were going on a trip. When they asked Brian and Gabby, they confirmed they were going away. She said there was nothing left in Brian's room, and they also used a second bedroom, Brian and Gabby did, as a living room. It had a couch and a TV, and by the time they left, only the couch and the TV were left between those 2 rooms. She asked Brian, why didn't they just keep their stuff there? And he said he didn't want to inconvenience them. And at the same time, Brian was converting that van into the camper van, and she knew the van was owned by Gabby. She said they didn't discuss any details of their upcoming trip, but Gabby or Chris told her that Gabby's brother was graduating and she wanted to go to New York for that. She doesn't remember if it was Brian, Gabby, or her husband, Chris, who said that they were going to be camping their way down after that. She said she didn't know they were going camping actually until her daughter saw a post. She doesn't know if it was on Snapchat or what, but her daughter took a screenshot and sent it to her and said, "Oh, look, they're out west." She said that was about a month after they left Florida. They never gave any indication they were coming back to Florida. She wasn't worried. She said they're adults. It's their life. She remembers that they left in early June of 2021 and a month later learned they were out west. She doesn't think she spoke to Brian that whole summer, but then she says she could be wrong. Maybe they called and texted. She said it wasn't unusual for them to not talk for extended amounts of time. For example, when Brian took a trip before, they didn't speak to him for about a month. Now, on this trip, Brian did call his dad on Father's Day, she thinks. She's asked if she learned from her daughter they were out west, if she called and maybe asked what they were doing. She said she's sure she must have called or texted, but she can't remember if Brian responded. She said, again, they had done this before. Gabby and Brian had actually taken a cross-country road trip. She kind of assumed it was going to be the same deal. The last road trip was in 2020. Brian and Gabby showed his parents photos of them out west, but she doesn't remember where they went. Her husband mentioned Oregon, and she thinks she remembers that they went to Oregon. She said she thinks Gabby mentioned seeing a relative or a friend of her mother's while they were on that 2020 trip. They asked Roberta if she expressed any concern about the second trip to Brian, and she said she was kind of disappointed and was like, another trip? She thought they would live there, save money to get a house, but he said the trip wasn't going to be too much because they were staying in the van and there's a lot of free camping out there. She said that was really her only concern was the financial aspect. She said she guesses that she had an idea they'd be gone longer than just the graduation. She said, I think I suspected he was going longer than the graduation. When he was fixing up the van, at first she thought it was just for weekend trips, but after that storage unit was rented and they started fixing that van up, she kind of assumed it was going to be for longer. She said, just like he did before. She said it's foggy, and right now she's having trouble with her, but I think that's right. Well, the attorney asked if she has any memory problems, and she says no. They asked if she has cognitive issues. She said it was 2 years ago. So much has happened, and she's just trying to remember. But as far as modifying the van, she said that Brian was working on a platform and some shelves that come down so they could camp in it, shelf for a table. They put a rug in the van and made it comfortable. She saw a mattress in there as well. Brian used his dad's tools, but Chris did not help with the modifications on the van. She asked again about when it was that she talked to Brian once it was clear they were out west, and she doesn't remember. She says they didn't speak much, so she would ask her daughter if she had heard from Brian. She just assumed he didn't have a lot of cell service wherever they were. She's asked why she didn't try to call, and she says, I'm sure I must have called or texted. She's going back and forth. She's saying, I didn't talk to him that whole summer, and now she's sure that they must have called and texted. When Brian flew home on August 17th of 2021, this was after the Moab incident, they were aware he was coming into town. And Roberta said she suggested that Brian empty out the storage unit just to save money. So Brian said, great. He did that. She doesn't know if that's the main reason he came back or not. She thinks it was also just a visit with his parents and with his nephews. She said Brian said the trip was going to be longer than they had planned, and she didn't know what was originally planned anyway. Brian also told her that they had found a place where they could work on a pumpkin farm. It would be without pay, but they could keep their van there for free. They could camp there, and then they would learn about farming. She said it was somewhere out west, but she did not know where. When he was home, she didn't ask about Gabby. She said, I think during that trip, then she said, I talked on the phone with Gabrielle, but I don't think I said, how's Gabrielle? I think I just asked Gabrielle herself, how are you? She said her understanding at this point, the relationship was fine. He didn't express any concerns about Gabby. He did not tell her about the incident in Moab or that they were having any problems getting along. And there was nothing that he said in that trip home that caused her to worry about the couple. She said Brian's demeanor was happy. He was happy to see his sisters and his nephews, and he seemed fine. She said they had a nice week. She said he didn't seem too excited about going back, but at the same time, he wasn't upset. He seemed to be looking forward to farming in the fall, but overall, everything seemed good. She's asked if she communicated with Brian any other way than telephone. when he's gone. And she said she may have emailed him, and whether they texted or talked on the phone, she's not sure. But she said that Brian wasn't much of an emailer, and she would only email him if, and then she said, I thought he might not look at it for a while because I didn't know the kind of reception he may or may not have, or even if he checked his email. So she would either text or call when she wanted to get in touch with him. She was asked to provide email exchanges with Brian as part of discovery in this case. They asked, was there a reason you didn't provide any? She said, I don't think there were any. And if there were, I would have provided them. She's asked about text messages, and then she's asked if she still has the text messages between her and Brian. She says she doesn't delete texts, but sometimes they delete themselves. She said when Brian got a new phone and she answered his new number, it automatically erased the text messages. She said, the old text, I didn't realize they were going to do that. She said she didn't try to recover those text messages. She didn't know you could, and she didn't know how to. The attorney says so when he bought a new phone, it deleted all the texts. And she said, yeah, because when she put in the new number for Brian, then she says, if I added him as another Brian, like Brian 1 or Brian 2, I probably would have kept it. But because she added a new phone number, it just deleted the old texts. They hand her an exhibit of her phone records from AT&T. Across the top, it says voice usage for her phone number. They tell her to go to another page and talk about Brian calling her on August 14th at 8:55 p.m. They spoke for around 25 minutes. She's asked if she remembers what they talked about. She said maybe for that upcoming trip on the 17th to come back to Florida to empty out that storage unit. She said they were probably planning his flight and all that stuff. This was 2 days, by the way, after that Moab incident, and he did not tell her about that. At this point in the deposition, there's a lot of confusion about universal time. And so with these next calls, I just updated to reflect the correct time because it kind of goes back and forth for a bit. But 2 days after that call, this would be August 16th, the day before he comes back to Florida, she called Brian at 9 p.m. That same afternoon at 3:06 p.m., she calls attorney Bertilino at his office. She said she could have been talking to one of his secretaries. She said, I know we had sold a property that he was investing with Chris. So maybe it was, I don't know. She said she calls the office for other reasons. She has a friend who works in the office and they do investments with him. She doesn't remember the reason she called that day. She's asked if she had Gabby's mail forwarded to New York after they left Florida for the road trip. She said Gabby wanted her mail forwarded, but she doesn't remember if Gabby did that or if she did it. She said she would help Gabby with a lot of things because sometimes she would have trouble with, and then she says, I remember helping her look for a check in her check log. Gabby didn't know how to do it. I may have helped her do the mail. She may have asked me to do it. I don't recall. I do remember she wanted that mail forwarded. They move on to August 26th of 2021. Just a side note, this is the day before Gabby was last seen alive. Roberta contacted attorney Bertilino again. Of course, she doesn't remember why she called. And she's asked if prior to August 28th of 2021, did she have any reason to call him about Brian? And she said no. Now, on the same date, August 26th, about 30 minutes after that first call, there was a call to her by attorney Bertilino's office. She said she would assume this was business related and not related to Brian at all. August 28th, this is the day after Gabby was last seen alive. At 4:18 p.m., Brian calls Roberta. The call went to voicemail. He called again at 5:38 p.m. That went to voicemail. A minute later, they had a call at 5:39 that lasted for 7 minutes and 23 seconds. She does remember that call. Roberta said she was with her grandson on the beach and she saw Brian was trying to call, but said she would call him that night when she had a chance. She said, I guess he finally got a hold of me here. And I said, I'm with your nephew on the beach. I can't really talk. She said, it's windy. I can't really hear. And so he talked to his nephew for a while. The attorney says, so yesterday your husband says, well, I guess that wasn't the day the stuff hit the fan. I guess it's the next day. But that same day at 7:30, we're still on August 28th here, one day after Gabby was seen alive. At 7:30, there was a call from Brian to Roberta. They talked for 10 minutes and 13 seconds. She says, it's funny. I don't recall. I thought he only talked to his nephew, but I guess I talked to him that day too a little bit. I don't remember it. She said, I was probably just telling him about, then she says, I don't remember exactly, but probably just how are you doing and about the race. The boys talked about the race and everything. The next day, August 29th, Brian called Roberta. She sees that call on the log they've got in front of her. Then she says she wants to clarify. She just remembered from the last phone call on the 28th. I remember saying I can't really talk long. I'm at the beach, but when I get home, we'll talk tomorrow. She's asked how he sounded on that call when she was on the beach, and she said fine, sounded normal. Interesting. She didn't remember anything, and then she can remember even how he sounded. Back to that August 29th call. At 3:20 p.m., Roberta says she doesn't remember which call it was, but she does remember that they had a long talk. She said they talked for a long time. She told Brian about their summer, what they were doing, caught him up with information about his nephews, told him about the race, told him about the weekend at Daytona. She does remember that conversation. The attorney says, is this the day your husband said you had a phone conversation with him when stuff hit the fan? She said, yeah, I remember at the very tail end of that conversation with him where everything seemed fine. And as we were saying goodbye, all of a sudden, he completely changed and he sounded very upset and his voice was very upset. And I didn't know why. I didn't want to push him. So we just said goodbye, but left it on he was very upset. And when I got off the phone, I told Chris, Brian sounded upset. Maybe you should give him a call. Well, the records show she talked to Brian for 54 minutes on that call. She said they talked 2 times that day, earlier and later. And then she said she doesn't remember. She said, I thought he called him after he got off the phone with me and spoke with Brian, or Brian called him. They talk about how this call that lasted 54 minutes on the records, it was kind of split in half, but it ended up being the one phone call. One portion showed 36 minutes and 37 seconds. The other call showed 17 minutes and 51 seconds, which totaled that 54 minutes and 28 seconds. She said maybe they got cut off and redialed or something. They don't know. The attorney says, so if you were on the phone for 55 minutes at that time, which would have been from 4:30 to 5:30, your husband immediately after that call contacted attorney Bertilino, according to the records I have. Do you know why after you got off the phone, or maybe even while you were on the phone with Brian, he contacted attorney Bertilino? She said, I thought he called Brian after he got off the phone with me and spoke with Brian, or Brian called him. The attorney says, according to the records I have, and he points out he reviewed these records with her husband the day before at his deposition. He called attorney Bertilino at 4:23 p.m. and he didn't call Brian until 4, about 20 minutes later. That's a little confusing. They ask if Brian told her in the conversation that he needed an attorney, and she said no. They say you can't explain why either immediately after you were speaking with Brian or during the phone call your husband called attorney Bertilino. She said, no, I thought he called Brian. She said, I don't know. She's asked, did you speak with attorney Bertilino that day? And she says, no. And then she says, oh, wait. Oh, did I? Wait, I don't recall. Now let's jump over to Chris's deposition just to give context about this event because it's super important. They're talking about this same day, this same call. Chris said that Brian called. He said, well, that's the day everything, hit the fan, I think. Roberta had spoken to Brian that day. And when he spoke, she got off the phone and said to me, Brian said, the attorney interrupts and says, wait, we are going to assert a spousal privilege for anything you said to Roberta or she said to you. I'll tell you not to say anything that you said to her and vice versa. Then he's asked about things hitting the fan that day. Chris says, I called Brian because, I felt I should call him. So I called him and that's what I did. I asked him, how's he doing? He was not calm. He got very excited and told me things had, Gabby's gone. And he got very frantic. Everything was frantic and quick. So, Gabby's gone. He's asked what that meant. He said, I have no idea what that meant. He's asked, what else did Brian say? Brian's dad said, well, it was quick. He said, and he was very panicked. And he said he didn't know what to do. He said, can you help me? I might need a lawyer. And I asked him why he wouldn't tell me. He was very frantic. Everything was frantic. And I started to not really comprehend. And then he said, can you help me? And I said, okay, I'll help you. I calmed him down and I said, I don't know. It was all mumbled. I still don't remember everything that happened, but he said he needed help and to get an attorney. I told him, yeah, I'll help you. I'll call Stephen Bertilino. Just stay put. How are you not going to ask your son, why do you need an attorney and why are you frantic and why are you saying Gabby's gone? I mean, it's like, come on. This is so transparent about they're not coming clean. Look, we may never know the truth, and I usually don't speculate, but I'm going to say right here, I think Brian spelled it out for him right then and there because my kid's not going to call me and say, my fiance is gone. I'm freaking out. I need an attorney. And me not say, what happened? Come on. Chris said he asked him again. Brian just said, just help me. And I said, yeah, I'm going to. Stay calm, stay put. And then he hung up. Brian told his dad he was in Jackson. He did not say Wyoming. He's asked, did Brian say he murdered Gabby? He says no. But he said she was gone. Chris said he said it several times. And he was frantic. And he needed a lawyer. He's asked, did you understand that to mean that something happened to Gabby? And he said, I understood it that something was wrong. Meaning what? He's asked. And he said, I had no idea. Well, the attorney says, well, your son's frantic. He wants you to call a lawyer and Gabby's gone. Did you believe at that time he had murdered her? And Chris says no. He also did not believe Gabby was dead at that point. So he's asked, what did you think gone meant? He said, I didn't even know what to think at the moment, at all. So that's that. The attorney says, well, if he told you that she was gone, but she just walked away, would he have been frantic? Do you know? Chris says, alls I know is what he told me. And it was very quick, very nervous, very scattered. So I don't remember everything he said, but he said he needed help. I tried to calm him down. He would not calm down and he hung the phone up on me. They talk about a phone conversation August 29th. Chris said he didn't think that lasted 5 minutes. So the attorney says your wife spoke with Brian on 2 occasions on Saturday the 28th. Once at 9:30 p.m. for 7 minutes and then once at 11:29 p.m. for 10 minutes. Did you know if at that time he mentioned Gabby was gone? Chris says, I don't know. I don't think I was with her at that time. So he's asked, where would you have been at that time of night? He said he was at the race. Also, Roberta was not with him at that race. After that phone call, he did call attorney Bertilino. He's asked, what did you contact him about? He said, that's just what was going on. I called him. I told him the same thing, letting him know that's what happened. I told him Brian called me. He was frantic. I didn't know what to do. And this is what Brian said. At first, I thought, I don't know. I don't see Steve or speak to him that often. So I told him. He didn't even know who Gabby was. He said he explained who Gabby was and everything. Brian was on a trip and he called me. I called him and this is what he told me. And that's it. So that's what I told him. He's asked, did you tell attorney Bertilino that you were concerned Gabby was dead? He said, after the conversation of how frantic he was, it was something I thought we had to consider. The attorney says, so on August 29th of 2021, your son told you Gabby was gone. You had a belief she may be dead, correct? Then he says, I didn't know. So he says, but you had a belief she might be dead. He said, I didn't believe that. No. The attorney says, you didn't? So what else would gone mean and that your son was frantic? What other possible interpretation could there be of that? Chris says, I don't know. I have no idea, but I can guess a million things for you. They asked if one guess was that she just walked away. And he said, yeah, that's a possibility. She just left, but that's great. But he didn't say she left, did he? He said she was gone. The attorney says, and if she just left and walked away, do you think you would have needed an attorney for that? And he said it was a situation of how frantic he was. I had no idea what to think. He asked me to get a lawyer. I could not get any more information from him. And I did what he asked. The attorney says he didn't say she walked away, right? He says, not that I know of. I don't remember. I don't think he did. The attorney says he didn't say she was kidnapped by anyone. He says no. So then he asked, what did attorney Bertilino say to you? And he said, well, then we did discuss that, maybe something seriously happened and we would act accordingly to keep everything. We don't know. So that's it. They asked, so Gabby was someone who lived with you? And he said, yes. Someone you loved? Yes. And you knew her parents would have wanted to know if something happened to her, correct? He says, yes. They asked, did you consider calling her parents? He says, no. They asked, why? You never even considered calling her parents. He said, I didn't know because I had no reason to. At that very moment, to think anything was going on, Gabby took off and did things that she on her own free will. So I had no idea where she was. The attorney points out, well, Brian never called you frantically and hung up on you when she had taken off and gone off on her own free will, had he? Chris says, I don't understand the question. What's the question? The attorney says, well, you said she had taken off before on her own free will. Isn't that what you said? And he says, yes. Then he says, oh, and should I call him then? No. The attorney says, but Brian he never called you frantic. And when she did that, did he? He says, yeah, I don't know. The attorney says, you don't know if he ever called you when he says, no. Look. I know what he said on the phone, and that's how I responded. The attorney says, okay, but he never called you before on those moments when she just walked off on her own, right? He says, no. He never told you on those occasions she was gone? He says, no. He's asked at any time prior to the time that Gabby's body was located, did you consider calling her parents to let them know what had happened? Chris says, I was concerned for everybody, everything, So, it was very difficult to deal with. So I don't know what the hell to think. So the attorney says, well, you're concerned for everybody. Did that include Joe Petito and Nicole Schmidt, Gabby's parents? He said, yeah. I was worried about everybody. I was worried about Gabby. I was worried about everybody. The attorney, so what did you do with that concern about Joe Petito and Nicole Schmidt? He said, I left it in my attorney's position there. I don't know what the right thing to do. I don't know how to respond to any of this, and still to this day, I don't know how anybody would handle it. So I relied on attorney Steven. All I knew, and that was that. I could have thought anything. I care about everybody. I don't know what we're getting at here. The attorney's like, oh, you don't know what we're getting at? And he says, no. The attorney says, that's what this lawsuit's about. Chris says that I cared for anybody. I do. I did care, and I didn't call him because it was the advice not to. The attorney says that was attorney Bertilino's advice to you, is to keep quiet. And he said, yeah. He's asked, did he specifically advise you not to call the Petitos? Chris said, yeah, I mean, not the Petitos, but don't speak to anybody about this. He's asked, did you have a conversation with attorney Bertilino about Gabby's family? He says, we talked about a lot of things, so I don't know if we talked about that specifically. The attorney says, well, from the moment you got this phone call when the stuff hit the fan until Gabby's body was located, did you have a conversation with attorney Bertilino about Joe Petito and or Nicole Schmidt? Chris says, about them what? I'm sure we talked about them. I don't know. So the attorney asked, well, what do you recall talking about? He says, I don't recall anything. The attorney asked, did he tell you not to specifically talk to them? Chris says, he says, don't speak to anybody. He says he doesn't remember the attorney specifically telling him not to talk to Joseph Petito or Nicole Schmidt. The attorney asked, did he tell you not to take their phone calls if they tried to reach out to you? And he said, not to speak to anybody. Did he tell you not to respond to them on Facebook or by text if they reached out to you? And he says, we were told not to respond to anybody. So we're going to leave off there. Man, I tell you what, these people like dodging questions like crazy. Tomorrow, we are going to probably flip-flop a little bit between these depositions, just because some of these things are related, just like that came a little bit later in Chris Laundrie's deposition, but it directly related to a very important time in this case. So we still have a ways to go with this. It's going to be several episodes, so look for those. I'll still be uploading some wiretaps over the weekend in the Adelson case and an update on the Harmony Montgomery case. Also, I need to do an update episode on the cases that we've been following. There's been a few developments here and there with some court dates and things like that. So I'm going to try to do that this weekend. We'll see. It may go into next week. That's it for this episode. Appreciate you guys listening. Stick around for part 2. It gets even more interesting. All right, guys. Hope you have a good rest of your evening. We'll see you soon.